point. Got it. So the other point in the exposure triangle is your ISO. So we all know the faster your shutter speed, generally the higher your ISO has to go. I mean, these cameras now go way up there, 25,000 ISO. I'm pretty comfortable up to 10,000 ISO with my cameras. It's also my comfort level in giving my clients quality images. So above 10,000, I try to stay, I try to stay at the highest 8,000 if possible. This particular picture, as you can see, was 8,000 ISO, wide open with that particular lens is f4 at 12/50th of a second. Super clean, stops action, and you don't see a whole lot of noise in there. It's just, even when you blow it up a bit, you might see a little noise in her black outfit, but super clean. And that's with the last version of my cameras. So the newer ones are even cleaner.
What camera are you shooting with?
Currently, so I'm a Canon guy, and I probably should have gone over more of this when we did a little intro. So I have always been a Canon photographer. When I worked at my newspaper in Cincinnati, they provided Nikon. So for about 6 years, I was Nikon, but I got them to switch over. I've just always been very comfortable with Canon. It feels good in my hands. But what I do tell people, and I also work for Canon. I am a freelance pro market rep, not the official title, but that's kind of what I do. So Canon has pro market reps that live all over the country. They service professionals in different markets. So it could be they have a group that deals with events like this. So professionals like myself who shoot sports, there's wildlife and birding, there's landscape, there's wedding and portrait industry. So Canon supports all of those. I go on the road with them and help them out at trade shows, at festivals, anytime Canon's showing cameras, loaning things out. So it could be, I could be in a tent at a wildlife festival, or I could be at a trade show in Vegas, or I could be, at a wedding and portrait industry deal where we're loaning out equipment for that particular profession. So I am partial to Canon, but everybody's making great equipment now. Everybody makes great stuff. I tell people, most importantly, when you're out in the market for a camera, you have to be comfortable with the camera you're using. Much like buying a vehicle where you go out and test drive a car, you're going to want to take a camera, put it in your hands, put it up to your eyes, put it around your neck, put it over your shoulder, and see what feels good. I love the ergonomics of Canon cameras. That's why I stick with it. I know that all the technology and all the cameras is great. One might differ a little bit from another, but eventually they're all this, ultimately they're all the same. They all put out great quality equipment. So I'm not a stickler on brand, although, the more people buy Canon, the more I keep working for them. So that's also, that's a good side of it too. But so I currently am fully mirrorless. I did that switch a year ago. I have the Canon R3s, which is their semi-flagship camera. It's their flagship when it comes to mirrorless cameras. It's sports oriented. I can shoot up to 30 frames a second if I want. It's got all the bells and whistles and the focusing system and all that. So things have really come a long way in camera autofocus, especially. So we went over shutter speed. Most importantly, you want a fast shutter speed. Aperture, I like it wide open. One, because wide open gives you a clean background. It gives you compression with a long lens, and it allows you to shoot that fast shutter speed. So I didn't bring my camera up with me, but my long lens here is a 200 to 400. If you can see me, It's a big lens, but it has to be a big lens. The front element's about that big around. It allows a lot of light in. So it can allow a 200 to 400 millimeter lens be an f4 at its maximum aperture instead of say a 5.6 or a 6.3, something like that. So my maximum aperture on that particular lens is an f4. So it gives me a lot of light gathering capability, which allows me to go fast shutter speed and also a somewhat lower ISO. So the game tonight, I'll be shooting at 1250, between 1250 of a second and 1600 of a second at f4 at 6400 ISO with my long lens. My short lens, I call it, which is a 70 to 200 2.8. I'll be at 1600 at 2.8 at 3200 ISO. So, and that just gives you an idea of my settings for a game like tonight. Metering modes. I don't think I've ever taken these cameras off my general evaluative metering mode. You can't shoot sports with a spot meter. It's just too fast. I think maybe once in a while I could do like a concert in spot metering just to get face. But in general, 99.9% of the time, like I said, I don't even think I've taken these cameras in a year off of spot metering. But in a situation like this, I know what the light is in here. I know what the color balance is. I don't even have to look at my light meter. The picture you see in front of you, that was probably shot in shutter priority. I had it set at 500th of a second. It was pretty low light that day, and I let the ISO float in auto ISO, and we can get into that as well. But the evaluative metering just gives you an overall good quality metering for the scene. Now, if you're shooting in bright sunlight or snow, backlit situation, there are tricks you have to play with your camera to overcompensate for that. And here we go. That would be exposure compensation. So, so if you're shooting an evaluative metering in this particular scene, I know that I have to have a minimum of 2000 of a second. This guy's hauling butt. He's probably doing 75, 80 miles an hour. He's going from shadow into sunlight. He's a little backlit. So I'm going to up my exposure compensation. And I don't know if you all know what exposure compensation is on your cameras, but it's kind of a way to trick your camera when you are in some automatic modes. And I like to shoot in shutter priority when I'm shooting outdoor sports. It gives me a lot of freedom to, from my camera. I know my camera, but it gives me a lot of freedom in how I shoot, and I don't have to think about, my exposures quite as much. But my back dial on my camera, I can dial around, and that's exposure compensation. So I know if my subject is going to be backlit, I have to open up my camera on the plus side. That's why this says exposure comp 0.3. But if I'm all out shooting in bright sun and snow, I'm probably at a stop in 2/3, plus 1.3 or 1.5 stops above what the camera is reading. So I am not shooting a silhouette, sometimes as much as 2 stops. So I'm able to do that with exposure compensation, which is pretty cool. Not all sports photographers do that. Not all photojournalists do that, or wildlife photographers. Some are always in manual exposure. And I think that's awesome. I applaud them. But for me, I get kind of lazy at times. I know my cameras, I know scenes, I know light. So I just keep it in a shutter priority, which is TV on my camera, and set my shutter speed and let my ISO going to an auto ISO mode, and I use exposure compensation.
I have a quick question.
Please.
Have you ever experimented with manual with auto ISO at all?
Oh yeah, all the time. The issue with that is you have to set up a dial on your camera somewhere that will help you do exposure compensation if you are on a floating ISO, an auto ISO. So if I'm shooting at 1,000th of a second at f4 and I'm letting my ISO float and my subject goes into a backlit situation, what are you going to do? You're kind of in a bad situation at that point because you can't compensate. Because if you dial your shutter speed or your aperture, your ISO is just going to do what it wants to do. So you have to, in my opinion, you have to have a way to compensate for that. So if I'm doing that in snow, I can go into the back of my camera and set my exposure compensation at 1 point whatever plus on the plus side to compensate, but you have to be able to compensate somehow for the floating ISO. So in general, I don't do it that much in manual exposure. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Are you sure? Okay.
Yes.
Just want to make sure you got it. All right. So another very important setting on your camera is your white balance. As you all know, some people don't ever take it off of auto white balance, and that is 80% of the time, that's probably just fine. These new cameras are so good in auto white balance. And I am, like I said, I'm a lazy photographer. I'm old. I've been doing this a long time. You know, and with the mirrorless cameras, you can kind of see what your color balance is doing, your white balance is doing while you're looking through your viewfinder. So auto white balance can be fabulous. But in a situation like I'm in tonight, and if you can see it again, you know, I know that this light's not going to change much other than these ribbon boards. You know, all these ribbon boards around me will cast some light, but I also know that these lights in the ceiling, based on my experience, are 3,800 Kelvin. So that was tests that a bunch of us have done sitting on the side, you know, on the end line. I will go to my manual white balance and I will set my Kelvin temperature to 3,800. That's for this arena. Another arena I shoot at is 4,200. It just gives you the best quality of light for the scene. I could also shoot this in auto, and most of the time it's going to be fine. But as soon as it picks up a ribbon board in the background, my white balance will change as I'm shooting. So to give me the most consistency, I set my Kelvin. And there's not, I don't do a lot of arenas, maybe 4 in the area, and most of them are between 35 and 4,200 Kelvin. And that's not like the old days where I take a color light temperature reading and go out. I just shoot and I chimp and I look at it and I go, it looks pretty good. I'll go with that. And if an editor behind me is saying, you know, when I send it in, hey, it's looking a little yellow, I'll dial it the other direction a little bit and take some of that yellow out. Another way of doing this would be setting your own custom white balance. And that would be taking a white card or a gray card, putting it in the light, you put it on your custom white balance setting and you shoot that card, and then you set it in your camera to be, that will be your white balance. So that's another really nice way of keeping a consistent white balance while you're shooting any event. Doesn't have to be sports. This could be a wedding, it could be a graduation, it could be anything, a portrait, doesn't really matter. White balance, what I have found over the years, if my white balance is off, it doesn't matter. Even if I'm at a reasonably low ISO, I'm going to get noise once I start futzing with my color temperature in my image. If I'm shooting raw, it won't matter quite as much as if I'm JPEG, but if I'm in a JPEG and this image you see right in front of you looks really yellow, you know, it's only 2,500 ISO. The Olympics, they have killer light, you know, they really get you a lot of light. But if it happened to be yellow and I start running my yellow temperature wheel on Photoshop or Lightroom, you're going to get noise. you know, you're going to start getting some noise in the shadows. So one way to beat that, besides having a low ISO, is a good white balance. So that's really going to help, and a proper exposure. So all of that really helps. The next big thing is, and I don't have a lot of factoids, like I don't speak in a lot of facts. I'm generally easily persuaded if someone has a good argument about something. Photography, there's not a ton of facts that I can give you. One fact I guarantee you that on a regular basis, the only way to get your sports in focus, any moving subject, is going to be a continuous autofocus mode. A continuous autofocus mode, and they're all the cameras are, it's called something different. Canon, it's AI focus or AI servo. Nikon, it might be something different. Sony, it's going to be something different, but they all have a one shot or a single shot autofocus. And we're not talking about your motor drive. We're strictly talking about your autofocusing system. So that is when your point in your camera is trained on your subject and your subject is moving. It's either going to follow your subject towards you, away from you, or it's not. So in one shot or single autofocus, where you can actually push the button down, lock the focus and move it, you're never going to get sharp images in sports. So you have to put your camera on a continuous autofocus, which could be called AI servo, AI focus. Canon or Nikon and Sony have a couple of different names for that as well. So it's very easy to test too. So it could be anything moving. You train your autofocus point on it. If your subject's coming or going away, that's what's going to follow your subject. So one shot focus, you'll never have consistent autofocus. You'll always have, people come to me all the time and said, I suck at shooting sports because nothing's in focus. One picture might be, and then after that, nothing is. So I said, let me see your camera, and it's almost always on one shot focus. So continuous autofocus. I can't stress it enough that you have to put your camera in a continuous mode. Focal points are way different now than they ever were. If you're still using an SLR or a DSLR, when I shot DSLRs, I always used my single center point autofocus. It's just predictable for me. When I picked up my camera to my eye, I knew that, the single point was where it had to be. I would find my subject and try and keep that point on my subject. Now with shooting with these mirrorless cameras, they have face detection, head detection, eye detection, tracking, all kinds of crazy stuff. And I feel like I'm cheating, compared to what it used to be. So in my camera, I will set my autofocus point as a center point, but I have facial detection, head detection, and eye detection all on. So when I train it on my subject, and this helps a lot when say this skier, this skier is not stationary. It's flipping up in the air and he's spinning and he's flipping. If I can't keep that single point on them, that moon would be in focus, not the skier, right? But now with the new cameras, if I catch that subject with my center point and have facial recognition, head detection, all that stuff, all the fancy stuff on, it's going to follow him across my screen, and I don't have to keep that subject dead center anymore. That's a game changer in sports. You can recompose and compose as your subject is moving. Let's say it's track and field and the guy's running. It doesn't have to be dead center anymore. I can recompose. If you ever shoot tennis, it is the most unbelievably helpful thing for tennis. Tennis, you got a subject on one side, the racket on the other, they're stretched out. You have to shoot that person to get them in focus with a center point. Now I can catch them with the center point and put them on the right side of my frame as they're reaching across the frame. And it's really, truly incredible how good the new autofocus is. So that's one of my top reasons for mirrorless cameras is the autofocusing systems on them are mind-blowing. It's a game changer. So, quick story. I had a stroke to my optic nerve in my right eye about 3 years ago, and I lost vision in my right eye. That's my shooting eye. I've always shot with my right eye. I've had to teach myself how to shoot left eye. That went fine. The hardest thing was looking at the back of my camera and not being able to see if anything's sharp or not because I can't see that close. America First Credit Union. The mirrorless cameras now allow me to look in the viewfinder, and we call it chimping. You can look at your image and see if it's sharp just by looking through the viewfinder. I no longer have to look at the back of my camera. In fact, my screen on my camera is flipped closed. I don't have my screen open ever when I'm shooting. So that was a major bonus for me, and it will extend my shooting career for God knows how long now. You know, I was really worried that my career was going to be, was coming to an end when I lost vision and I couldn't see, and I couldn't see the back of my camera. So game changer. So mirrorless cameras, I was not a huge fan when they came out. Now I'm a full-fledged junkie, when it comes to the mirrorless. So the focal points, they're now with mirrorless cameras edge to edge, especially with some of the Canon cameras and the Sony cameras. Those focal points, once they catch your subject, it's almost edge to edge. Whereas the old cameras, center point, they may go out 14, a few cross point autofocuses, but it was never all the way to the edge of your frame. Now it is, which it's pretty awesome. Anybody questions about focal points or? Okay. Long time back button focus shooter. It's where I'm focusing with my back button and shooting with my front finger. So I don't know if any of you folks have heard of that, or people try and persuade you one way or the other. I would say now it's not as important to go back button focus as it used to be. The mirrorless cameras allow you, since the focal points can move, you don't have to worry so much about composing and releasing the autofocus point with your thumb. I still shoot back button focus. It's because I've trained my fingers to do that, but it's not an easy process to focus and take a picture all at the same time. I know some folks really have a hard time with it. If this was a year and a half ago, 2 years, I would say absolutely go back button focus. So if you're with a DSLR, it's still a good idea when shooting action to go back button focus. But now with the mirrorless cameras, it's pretty simple just to keep it in front button focus. Motor drives. All the new cameras have motor drives. Is it important? Yeah, it's pretty important, but it's not an end-all be-all situation. You don't have to have a motor drive. This particular camera, I don't remember, it was probably a 1DX2 maybe. It was a nice time to have a motor drive, and I hammered the motor drive. I don't always, shoot this many frames. Like if I'm shooting this basketball game and I'm shooting for the NBA, I'm actually hardwired into the NBA, and they receive every image that I shoot, and they tell me, don't hammer the motor drive. Slow your motor drive down. If I could shoot 3 frames a second instead of 12, they would be very happy. They don't want, they don't want that many images coming across. It makes it difficult for the editor to look for them and pick the best pictures. But I still use the motor drive, but timing. Sports is all about timing. You make, so the woman I'm shooting with, she's on strobes. So if you see a big flash behind me, they're the arena strobes. There's big strobes up in the ceiling, and she's shooting 1 frame at a time. She's remarkable at how good she is at her timing. So it's that picture of the guy, the ball coming out of the fingertips, boom, she nails it. She's really good at that. Whereas I'm used to a motor drive. I'm not used to having to shoot one frame at a time. So motor drives are important, but you don't have to get all caught up in whether your camera shoots 5 frames a second or 16 frames a second, 20 or 30 frames a second. Mine will shoot 30 frames. I'm not shooting this game at 30 frames a second. I'm slowing it down. So we talked about 90% of the time I, want to stop action. There are other times when I don't. There are other times when I have time to be creative. When I can throw misses away. Tonight I won't do it because I can't throw them away. They're getting all my misses. So, but creativity is really important. When I worked at the newspaper, working for a wire service like USA Today or AP or Getty or whoever I might be assigned for that day, they do like to see some creativity. So when I'm shooting a 10,000 meter race at the Olympics, they go by and they go by and they go by. So, I have time to try and pan. Same thing with some of the long speed skating events, ice skating, so here you have 3, 4 different creative devices. So I call them creative devices because that's what I learned in visual communications class in college. A creative device. You see the bottom picture above the type, it's the silhouette. That's a creative device. It's something you think about when you go out to shoot. You're like, oh my God, that's a beautiful silhouette. That's a creative device. Panning is a creative device. Motion is a creative device. Stop action, leading lines, all of these different things are creative devices. I have a list of them, and it was something my professor gave me when I was at Ohio University. He said, here's your list of creative devices, learn them. And we're going to base our classes off of creative devices. So I could create a whole curriculum out of creative devices. Every week would be a different creative device. When you're really successful, you can have more than one creative device in an image. So it may be a silhouette. It could be a reflection. It could be both in the same picture. It could be a reflection on a glass table or a lake or ice or whatever it might be, a plate glass window. But these creative devices have helped me through my career for years and years, because I would go, when I worked at the paper, I'd have, let's say, 3 assignments a day, 4 assignments a day, and you just get burned out and you just can't think of, when you pop into some boring event. So I would start running creative devices through my brain, like, can I get a silhouette here? Is there motion? Can I get motion? Can I pan? Can I get a, reflection? So the top image and the bottom left image are both panning. It's where you slow your shutter speed down and you follow your subject. The middle one with the skaters, that's
Can
motion.
I interrupt you for 1 second?
Please, yeah.
Our next competition is long exposure.
There you go. Okay.
So I hope everybody who's listening to this takes a look at the 2 images that demonstrate long exposure. And I hope that's gives you some idea for what you're shooting for our next competition. Thanks.
And remember, long exposure could be, you could use that device for almost anything. It doesn't have to be a night picture. It could be a panning picture like the top left, the 2 on the left. It could be a motion picture like the skater in the middle. Those are longer exposures. Now, unless you put this has to be a 5-second exposure, that's a different story. But this could be automobiles, it could be kids running, it could be birds in flight, it could be anything that has some motion, or a night image with long exposure. So it could be anything there. The top right is a multiple exposure in camera. So the cameras have become a lot more, there's a lot more bells and whistles. That one is literally just 2 people, fencing. But with a multiple exposure setup in my camera, I was able to make it look like a lot more. When you're shooting, 50 matches in a day or whatever it may have been, and they're long matches, you start getting bored. So you start trying different things. So again, in the creative set, just trying to do something a little different. And again, in sports, as in life, and any type of photography, you know, it's all in the details. There's a lot of things to look at when you're shooting events and people, and sometimes things just stick out and they're worth photographing. So I'm always kind of blown away with how different the different tattoos on players' bodies. You know, random guy with Willie Nelson on him, you know, not a random guy. I mean, he was a player, but a professional basketball player with Willie Nelson on his calf. So, yeah, just keep an eye out for details. What's interesting to you will likely be interesting to somebody else. So keep that in mind when you're out shooting. You don't have to have a macro lens to shoot details. People bitch and moan about weather all the time. I've been bitching and moaning about the weather here all week long because it has not stopped snowing for the whole winter. We have over 700 inches of snow this year. It's fantastic for skiing, but I'm hitting my wall because part-time I work at a ski resort, Deer Valley Ski Resort here in Park City, and I do that so we can ski for free. And we're just getting pummeled with snow. But that being said, in sports, when when it starts raining like this, a lot of photographers are going into the, inside and ducking for cover. I am going out to the rain. I'm going out to the snow. I'm going out to whatever it is, because weather makes pictures. You just have to be there to do it, right? Doesn't have to be sports. It could be, some of the best landscape photos are because of weather. So think about that. So I'm always prepared. Well, mostly always prepared. I've got my rain gear. I've got gear for my cameras and lenses to keep them dry. Whether if it's a hot sunny day like the bottom right, where it's super hot, 80, 90 degrees with 80% humidity, you're dressing appropriately, you're trying to stay hydrated, but it's all about, just trying to make a scene, make something look really cool in the weather. So think about that. Don't run away from it. If you're prepared, go out and try and make pictures in the weather, because it can be the best. Expect the unexpected. Both of these shot from the exact same location, 2 different games, 2 different nights. It's kind of my spot that I would shoot from in the, late innings of a game. Actually, these are early innings in the game. Storms roll through. This is when I lived in Cincinnati. And suddenly the game doesn't mean jack to me, right? The weather is what I focused on. These were probably both late August games. The teams in the crapper doesn't mean anything. Nobody cares. And I'm trying to make a pretty picture, something really cool. So I just sat and waited with my wide angle lens, with both of these, especially the lightning, and tried to time it right, because I didn't have my tripod, so I couldn't go super long exposure on it. So just expect the unexpected. Always be ready for something different. And that's what the picture on the right with the orange sky, that was my, probably still to this day, and that was many, many years ago, was probably the most action I've seen on one of my social media posts ever. That was from a random game that meant nothing in the scheme of the season. And the picture, it just speaks. Backgrounds, I can't say it enough. Backgrounds mean a lot when you're shooting sports. They mean a lot in again, I keep relating this to anything you shoot. Keep it clean. I don't do a lot of layering my photography. I like to keep my subject obvious, and I like to keep it really clean. So sometimes it's like in baseball, or even in the figure skating, it's going up in the stands. It's going high. just to keep the backgrounds clean. Because you can see in the soccer picture down below, I couldn't move around. There are, other photographers and things in the background, but in this situation, I'm trying to get rings in the image. I'm trying to place that subject at the Olympics. Otherwise, it's just another athlete with an American flag. You want to try and make placement. The skier, we are specifically set up at the bottom of that hill with a black background, knowing that it's going to look really sweet when they come into the frame. Super clean. So just think about it while you're shooting. It goes through my mind all the time. Keep it clean. Keep it clean. And again, sometimes that's going really low. Sometimes it's going up in the stands. Sometimes it's, if I'm in a stadium and one side of the stadium's in the sun and the other side's in the shade, I go to the sunny side looking back into the shade. My subject's backlit, gives them some rim light, some separation from the background. And then I don't see a bunch of empty seats or a bunch of people, sitting in the sun in the background. It's going to be a dark, shady background. And because it's all about your subject popping out of the frame. So you've got action, that's why we're shooting sports. We're looking for action. Whether it's just a football, college football, basketball, Kentucky Derby, we're looking for the action. So you're looking for that decisive moment. Again, whether it's the finish line or the end zone or a goal or that moment where the ball just strikes their head. So we're looking for action. But let me tell you, you keep your eye up to the camera at all times. Right after the action, much of the time, if it's big, there's going to be reaction. So keep that in mind. I see a lot of people shoot, drop their cameras, and the guy's like, they're screaming. So, it happens to me quite a bit, but I know better. I know that I should keep my face up to the camera and don't get lazy while I'm shooting, because they're the storytellers. Excuse me. Guy coming off the field crying, what does that mean? It means he lost, right? Guy coming off the Taekwondo match crying either means he lost or he won, but most of the time they lost. A couple winners on the right, you knew that they won the point, they won the match. So a lot of times the reaction when they say a picture speaks 1,000 words, there you go. Gear's important, but you don't have to have, you see my big bald head in the middle there. I'm using a 200 to 400 millimeter lens, as just about everyone near me is using a 2 to 4 or a 400 2.8. We're shooting short track speed skating in that picture on the top. We're using fast zoom lenses. Fast meaning big aperture lenses, so we can shoot in dark situations and still use low ISO, fast shutter speeds. So that's, also important, but not, I'm not telling you all to run out and buy a $14,000 lens. It's not, I only buy gear that's going to make me money, right? So I'm not going to go buy a 100 macro right now because that's not going to make me money. I need the long, fast lenses at the moment. That's where I put my money. But you can go out and shoot, the bottom picture where I'm standing in the snow. That's a 100 400. Still an expensive lens, but it's not $14,000. It's a $2,000 lens. That's going to give me in outdoor situations just as good a result as my 200 to 400. That's why I'm holding it, hand holding it, instead of standing there with the long stuff the guy on the top is. It's easier on my body. It's easier to hold, easier to move around. So you can go with a 100 to 400, 100 to 500. Canon, Nikon, they all make similar focal lengths. Sony, Sigma, Tamron, they all make them. I'm still bound to using my manufacturer's lenses. I think they're the best, but you can get away with less expensive lenses as long as you have that focal length. You could use a 70-200 if you have it and put a 1.4 on it to bring things closer. So gear is still pretty important, but you can get away. You don't have to spend that kind of money on lenses. And you can take all of this information that I'm giving you with shutter speed, aperture, ISO, focal points, continuous autofocus, exposure compensation, and use it in your everyday shooting, right? It's portraits of the little girls. It's, you know, my neighbors on a slip and slide. It's shooting the mud stash, you know, race. It's my dogs, you know, my dog jumping off a dock. You can use everything that I'm telling you. Will go for portraiture, will go for all of your everyday stuff. So I hope you can see how that all relates. And if not, see it now. When you go out and practice these things, you will eventually, hopefully, see it. Otherwise, you email me and say, I don't know what the hell you were talking about. Can you help me? And I'm saying, sure, I can help you. So first, I want to thank you all for having me. And I do want to take questions. I love talking about photography. I love teaching people photography. It's more exciting for me when a light bulb goes off for somebody in their brain, when they finally get something that they didn't understand prior to us having that conversation. So I really hope you guys can follow along. If you get on Instagram and follow Swingman Photo, I'll post pictures from tonight's game, probably about midnight tonight. They'll be on there tomorrow, so you can actually see what I did this evening. Hopefully I can keep my job and they're all good and sharp and work for my client. But swingmanphoto@yahoo.com, or I actually changed my email to jeff@swingmanphoto.com. So it's my own website. But thank you. Please let me know what kind of questions you have. I'm here for a few more, answer some of that.
Jeff, I got a question for you.
Please.
If you're shooting sort of a sport you don't know, do you like prep? Should I prep ahead of time? Like, I've never shot lacrosse before.
Oh yeah.
I realized after shooting my cousin's son's game last year, I was in all the wrong spots.
Yeah. Well, preparation always helps. It's never a bad thing to, you know, get on Google and say lacrosse photos and go to images and kind of get an idea where they shoot from. When I do an event like the Olympics, okay, it's a big ass event. It's the biggest, best of everything, but they are sending me to events that I have never shot before. I'd never shot fencing before that day. I'd never shot taekwondo or karate before that day. Water polo, speed skating, you know, before those days, first time I'd ever shot them. So one thing you do, and it's helpful, and I respect people that do this, come up to the person who looks like they're the guy who's been shooting lacrosse for the last 10 years, right? So I got that advice from a photographer named Bill Epridge, who was an East Coast guy. He's no longer with us. Life magazine, Sports Illustrated. He's the guy that had Bobby Kennedy assassination, you know, the picture on Life cover. And he told me my first Olympics, when you go to shoot speed skating, go up to the guy or the gal who has the photo vest on and has all the speed skating pins from all the, you know, they're the people who know what corner to stand on. They're the ones who know what location, you know, so you kind of shadow. I don't love people shadowing me, but I certainly respect somebody to come up and go, I've never shot this before. What do you think? You know, where should I stand? Well, one, in a place that you're going to be safe. Two, lacrosse, you probably want to be in a back corner from the goal, so you're getting, them coming at the goal across the goal.
Yeah,
So
that was
yes,
one.
preparation helps, and ask questions while you're at a game. Don't
Yeah,
be shy.
it was a high school game, and after like the first half, I guess there was a couple news photographers there, and I
Yeah.
realized where they were floating too, depending on the flow of the game. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
because I never knew the flow of a lacrosse game.
There's a lot of whistles. It's a hard game to shoot because I like to shoot tight, and they're really stretched out, with
Yes.
sticks. So, I also I don't like to chase action like soccer and football. Football, you tend to have to chase it a bit. You have to decide whether you want to be in front of the line of scrimmage or the back of the line of scrimmage. Soccer, you want them coming at you for the most part. I try not to chase action a lot because inevitably you're going to run down the field and it's going to happen the other direction where you just came from. So, I tend to have hunches. All right, there's not been a whole lot of action here. I'm going to move on and try and find the action. Looks like I did that, soccer game the other night, and it helped because I was just, it was just nothing happening on my end. So
Right.
that did help. But yeah, definitely preparation
All right, thank you.
and questions. Ask questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
I've been shooting this past season, my grandson's wrestling matches.
Yeah,
So using a 2.8, 70 to 200.
great lens for that.
Yeah. And, I've come across sometimes where, of course, that it's a special match. They'll take the lights down
Yeah,
and you have like horrible.
spotlight.
Yeah, sometimes spotlight or just yeah. And the lighting is like really horrible. I was trying to figure out if I could use a flash and the team my grandson's team, the coach and that they're not opposed to it. But that would be on camera,
Yeah.
and
Sports
it's
and
just
flash do not mix very well.
exactly.
Like I said, they use flash basically. Essentially, it's a strobe here at the arena, but it's set up way up high, so it's lighting the whole scene evenly.
Right.
She's shooting this game probably at 100 ISO at whatever her flash ratio will give her, like 2/50 of a second, and these strobes have such a short duration that you're not going to get ghosting.
Mm,
When I used to shoot high school basketball and sometimes wrestling, I would put strobes on a light stand and I would put them in 2 or 3 corners. So I never shot on camera strobe for any sport. It
right.
just looks terrible. So if they're bringing the light down and it's spot lit, you might want to go out before the match and have somebody, find your proper exposure and then put your camera on manual exposure. And for that portion of the mat, that would be what I'd recommend. Strobe just looks terrible, especially on camera.
So when you're shooting, are you sending those back, or you're not sending raw back? You're not shooting raw, you're shooting JPEG?
Yeah, I'm not shooting raw. The only time I shoot raw in sports is if I have a client that needs raw images, but if I'm on deadline, I'm shooting JPEG. Raw are just it's just too much to process. It takes me too long to download the images. I'm all about speed.
Right.
So JPEG's fine. Now, if you're not on deadline and you don't mind, if you're going to go through and just dump, throw out all your bad images, that'd be fine. But I might shoot 3,000 images tonight. That's just too much.
Right.
Too many raw images.
But in the case of like when that lighting is so
Yeah.
bad,
Then if you
there's-
know that the lighting is terrible, then shooting raw is not a bad idea. And then just go throw out all your misses later. So you're not just filling your hard drives up with garbage.
right. Thank
And
you.
again, remember, it might help you to set your white balance. Go into that gym and play with your white balance, Matt. Play with your Kelvin temperature. Go with a card and shoot your white balance, shoot a custom white balance and see how that
So-
works.
Okay, like, is that a white card or a gray card?
Either.
Or either, and then
Yeah.
would you put it like on the mat?
I
What's
generally
child?
have, I'll use a piece of like
What?
construction paper or
What
something like
child?
that.
Mama's busy, kid. What, my child? Child,
Yes. So I will usually just shoot a piece of white paper, or if there's something on the court, like I'm looking down at the Jazz court in the middle, it says Utah Jazz in white. So I might just use that as my custom shot.
Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Don't forget though, I really do mean for you to, if you have questions, email me. So either get on my website and sign up on my website, or take my email down and reach out. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. What else? Any more?
Do we have some more questions for Jeff?
You guys got it down? You're ready to go? You're gonna go shoot a soccer game tomorrow?
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So do you typically move to multiple locations during a shoot, or do you stay in one location?
Yeah, it depends on what sport. So tonight, I've got a reserve spot right down on the court. I don't move except for maybe a timeout where I need to run over to the bench or something, but I'm gonna end up back in that spot. Now, when I shoot soccer, I don't chase the action, but I do try and put myself in the position for best images. Now, when I shoot Major League Soccer, I shoot for USA Today. USA Today is a rights holder, so there are certain expectations when I'm shooting those games. And I have a different access than anybody else that's a still photographer, other than maybe a team photographer. So I'm allowed on the team side, bench side, and to move behind the benches. Other photographers for the newspaper, Associated Press, Getty, they're not allowed to. They have to stay in their location. They have to be escorted to the other side of the field, so they can't move around. Football, I would chase the action in a sense that if they're coming at me, I get them coming at me. As soon as they go to the other end of the field, timeout, whatever, I'm going to go to the other end of the field. So I do chase the action in football quite a bit. Otherwise, I try not to run around too much. Again, it depends on who I'm shooting for. If it's just myself, if I'm one of you guys and I'm shooting for myself just to get better, I get a feel for the game where most of the action is, and I'm going to go find that action and get closer to it. And I will say, one of the big mistakes that people make, you had mentioned, I don't know who it was, mentioned that they're shooting wrestling with a 7200. If that's your longest lens and you're shooting, say, soccer, and all of a sudden you go by a 100 to 400, a major habit of people that go by their long lens is they back up. They get farther away. So they essentially have made their focal length exact same as what their 7200 is by going to a 400 and backing up twice as far. So fill your frame with your action. You got a 400 for a reason. Bring those people close to you. Bring your subject close to you by getting closer to them. Just a little tip. A lot of people, I see it all the time. I'm like, what the hell are you doing all the way back there when you finally just got your long lens? Get closer. Don't back up. So we joke and we say tight is right. So that's filling your subject, filling your frame with your subject.
Where would be the best spot to shoot a Major League Baseball game?
Well, if you're credentialed, the dugouts, they have photo wells that you have to shoot from. So you would have to be a credentialed photographer to go on the field and shoot from those assigned positions. Now, a lot of places will not let you in with professional looking gear. So it would say it on the back of your ticket. If you're a ticket holder and you just buy a ticket for a seat, they may let you sneak in with a 70 to 200 or a 100 to 400 that looks like a 70 to 200. But they're not likely going to let you in with a 200 to 400 like you see in this picture at bottom left. But if they do, the above shots like second base, I just shoot from that first row concourse, you know, where you're going to go get your beer or your hot dog. You know, I walk up and stand behind that last row of seats. A lot of times it's your ADA section where wheelchairs might be. You just stand in there and you can get really nice, clean shots from shooting down at the field. Otherwise, if you have good seats and you're low, you can shoot low as well. But you know, first base side looks really good at second base for double plays. Out by first base, shooting back at home plate's a really nice spot to shoot the play at home. So, or third base side, like you're kind of even with the third base. It also looks good at home when you got the catcher waiting for your player, or you've got access to shooting the outfield a little bit. But to be in the photo well, you have to have a credential.
Any more questions?
No? Okay. So I really would love it if you guys got on my website and signed up. You'd be able to get updates on future webinars and workshops that I teach. I do a lot of workshops for hunts. So we have, especially you East Coasters coming out here to the West. Come on out to Moab, come out to, you know, we've already done our Moab workshop for this year, but we've got Monument Valley, Valley of Fire. I'm going to Indonesia and doing Bali and Borneo for orangutans and culture. You know, none of these might not suit you now, but a future workshop might really excite you. So follow along at Hunts, follow along on mine because I put my Hunts workshops on there. But and if there's future webinars that we might be doing, we try and share that also. So I'd really love it if you followed along with me. And again, don't hesitate to reach out with questions. Generally, if you call me, I don't answer because I don't, you know, but I will answer text messages because if I don't know who you are, I generally think it's spam. So text me, email me, reach out for during, you know, with social media, all that. So I truly hope that this helps you, any of you, all of you in some way, even if it's the smallest little nugget of some information that you could use photographing your kids, your grandkids, your neighbors' kids, major league sporting event, college, high school, anything like that. Okay. All right. So I really appreciate
Jeff,
Yeah.
wait, one more quick question.
Go for it.
Like, when you're doing the JPEGs and you're saying you're sending them right to the editor,
Yeah.
and do they crop anything, or are you like doing these perfect pictures all the time like we're seeing here?
Oh, yeah, they crop. No, I don't send perfect pictures all the time. I wish I did. And I wish they cropped them the way I would crop them. It's a really hard thing for me to, it's really fabulous because I don't have to get in and capture my images. When I'm shooting for USA Today or AP or anybody else, I have to get in and actually load my pictures, find the right one, bring it up, crop it, tone it, and caption it. So I got to say player A battles player B in the first half of this particular game. Whereas when I'm sending it direct, they do all that.
Yeah.
But I also like, it's hard to relinquish control of your images to an editor. So, and that's my editor right now texting me going,
Yeah.
hey, are you at the game? You know, are you, you know, are you at the game? I'm going to be your cropper tonight, basically.
Yeah.
So when I look at the cropped images, I cringe 90% of the time, even though they're NBA editors, just between you and I, you know, I don't love their crops. You know, they keep it really loose, maybe for a reason. I crop tight and clean, so I get rid of extremities. I try to get rid of like white lines that might be distracting. So I'm pretty careful about my crops, and you should too. Be careful about your crop. It's not a hard thing to do. You can always change your perspective just a little bit, your horizon lines, straighten them up, get rid of, you know, a rake in the background, get rid of, and I'm not saying clone them out because I don't do any of that, but just keep it nice and clean. Get rid of those little strange lines that you don't need.
Right. Very good. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Anything else?
This was great, Jeff.
All right. Well, again, I hope to hear from y'all. I'd love to do this again on any other subject you might have, whether it's just shooting people, culture, landscape, whatever you might have questions about.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your nights and
Everybody, hang
yeah.
on one second.
yeah,
When
you
Jeff
guys need
gets
to hang
off,
on.
everybody stay on because we're going to do a quick meeting.
All right. I'm going to take off. Thanks so much.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much, Jeff.
Enjoy
It
the-
was
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the
great.
game
All
tonight.
right. See ya.